Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this sun of York, and all the clouds that lord upon our house, in the deep bosom of the ocean buried.
Shakespeare today, huh? I had a hunch.
Well, it's the opening lines of Richard III. I thought we could maybe class up the show a little bit, and it's all about the would-be king rage against the guy who got to be king, at least at that point.
But what is the point? I may have heard something about summer, winter in there, but I assume we're not talking about seasons today.
Well, not seasons specifically, but more as I was looking out upon the yard, I was thinking there's got to be something, any kind of season we're in, that we need to be knowing and doing with our lawns. It's whether now when there's snow on it or whether there's in the middle of the glorious summer, as Shakespeare said.
So what you're saying is that no matter the weather outside, we can still be learning about what we should be doing, when we should be doing it, and what we should be doing it with.
Exactly. I mean, if Richard schemed during his winter of discontent, we should find something useful to do too. I mean, let's go outside and, maybe we'll find something inside to do first. The Homeowner's Handbook was made possible through North Star Comfort Services. For over 65 years, North Star has been helping make more comfortable and energy-efficient living environments for families. You know, I suppose anybody who's ever had to deal with a lawn has dreamt about artificial turf. I mean, sure, it's the same height year-round, same color year-round, all sorts of nice things, but I mean, it's just not really realistic for an everyday lawn. First thing that pops in my mind is, what do you do if you've, animals that walk around on it? But anyway.
But more relative to us today, what is the point of lawns? Lawns have been around, they're part of the American dream. Back to, you can picture, the white picket fence, which is a little bit dated today, but lawns are still just as relevant. Why is that?
Well, I guess that means we should start with some history first then, right?
Of course.
The word lawn comes from the Middle English word laund, which in turn comes from the Middle French word land, and it originally referred to an open space or an open space in woods, like a glade in other words. Not that kind of glade. For the record, glade was a Celtic word long before it was an air freshener brand.
The earliest lawns then were more for defensive purposes between the castle and the forest. This is for, so the armies can't exactly sneak across an open lawn. But also around villages, the commons areas around them where the livestock roamed, fertilizing and cutting as they went.
I wonder if they had someone designated in the villages to, scoop the lawns back then too. And I know we do at our house. Anyway, though, the lawns that we kind of think of date more to the 16th century, and back then it wasn't really the grasses we think of, but more of a ground cover type plant like chamomile or thyme.
Maybe some parsley, sage, and rosemary as well?
Anyway, yet there's another invention of sorts that came along that we need to account for as well. Golfing and lawn bowling come into popularity in England and Scotland as both countries, as well as all of Europe, exit the Dark Ages. And of course, to play either of those games, you need lots of wide open area and better ground cover than, say, chamomile or thyme, because either of those wilt under the pressure. Speaking of wilting under pressure, though, there's always Augusta, 18th hole, lines up. Birdie would give him the lead. Hush, eerie silence. Absolute concentration is necessary. Lines up.
So what kind of grass can we use? Let's go talk to an expert and find out.
So to talk about lawns, I thought we'd come find an expert on lawns. Rebecca, how are we doing today?
Good.
All right, so let's start with the basics. What is the standard lawn?
Well, in the Wichita area or in Kansas, the most common lawn grass that we see is tall fescue.
Tall fescue.
It's a cool season grass, and it tends to be green from March through November, depending on the weather.
What are the other choices?
Your other options are warm season grasses. So those are grasses like Bermuda grass, buffalo grass, and zoysia grass.
Okay.
And the warm season grasses tend to be green from May till September, and they love the heat. One of the first questions I start with is your yard currently shady or sunny? Because if your yard is primarily shady, then there's only one real choice, and that's tall fescue, because that's the grass that tolerates shade. With the warm season grasses, we alluded to it earlier, they don't tolerate shade, so you need to have full sun in order to use one of the warm season grasses. The pros of all of the warm season grasses is that they don't require anywhere near as much water, fertilizer, or maintenance in general as, for instance, your tall fescue. So if you're looking for low maintenance, they can be a great option. Yes. The downside to all three of those grasses is that they don't look like tall fescue.
Okay.
We're used to tall fescue, with that dark green color, the green from March to November, and so our warm season grasses tend to be not as dark green. Buffalo grass, in fact, tends to be a little bit gray-green. No amount of fertilizing is going to make it look like fescue. Right.
Spray paint only, I guess.
Spray paint only. The buffalo, the Bermuda, and the zoysia, well, they're much lower maintenance and all of those sorts of things. They're not green for as much of the year, and they don't have that same dark green color. And if you try to force them to be dark green by watering and fertilizing and all those sorts of things, it tends to damage them. It's not a thick lawn grass usually, and so you tend to have more weeds. So if weeds are something that you just can't tolerate at all, buffalo grass probably not a good choice.
Okay.
Bermuda and zoysia, on the other hand, can do a really good job of choking out weeds.
Okay. Now, you talk like, the whether shade or no shade, and I'm sure in most cases people's yards aren't 100% one or the other.
Right. Some people actually will have a different grass for their backyard and their front yard. If you've got a different situation, a lot of people like their front yard to look really nice, and so they'll put in the work and maintenance on the fescue to have it look nice and dark green.
Okay.
And then have Bermuda grass or something in the backyard that's a little lower maintenance, is going to tolerate kids, dogs, whatever, running around and wreaking havoc. K-State has a number of resources regarding lawn care, have print publications that you can pick up for free at our office, or that you can download online, and there's a publication for each of these primary grasses. So you can learn all about each grass
Cover the
individually. And then we also have other publications regarding planting a lawn, watering, mowing, weed control, all of those kinds of good things.
So watering is a pretty big deal about, that'll dictate, how good or bad your yard's going to look. And I've even lived in areas where they have definitive water restrictions, particularly in the summer, and who knows, we may end up with them here when those serious rain starts happening. So what's kind of the ideal, or is there an ideal watering guideline?
Well, we have a rule of thumb, and that rule of thumb is about 1 inch of water per week.
Okay.
But what does that mean?
I have no idea.
Exactly. Most people have no idea. And it's a rule of thumb, like it's kind of an average. So during the heat of the summer, you actually need more. And during the spring and fall, when it's cool and moist, you need less. A 1 gallon milk jug, that's 1 gallon of water. To water 1 inch, that 1 gallon milk jug will water a 15-inch square area with 1 inch of water.
Okay. So that helps a little bit, although for a second there I thought you were going to lead into a logic puzzle about a 5 gallon and 3 gallon thing. But
well, we could, but let's not.
Fair enough.
So when we say 1 inch of water, we're meaning 1 inch of water over a whole area, and that 1 inch soaks into the soil and it soaks in deep. So our other mantra with watering is deeply and infrequently.
Oh, okay.
So you want to put down as close to 1 inch of water as possible each time you irrigate, because that's going to soak into the soil, and then you don't want to go back and water again until the top couple of inches have dried out.
So it's not one of those things where you necessarily want to do like a 10-minute cycle in the morning and a 10-minute cycle in the evening.
Right, and that gets to be our challenge, is everyone waters with their sprinkler system, whether they're dragging a hose or have an automatic system, you water by time.
Yes.
And you actually are supposed to be watering by how much you put down. So you have to calibrate somehow, which means you either hire a professional to audit and set up your system,
Sure.
or you get some rain gauges. I like to use empty tuna cans because they're
Really?
a handy dandy 1.25 inch depth. And you set them out around your lawn and you run your system for however long you think you should run it, and you see how full it is.
That is just a tremendous idea.
The other thing to consider with watering is your soil affects how much water you need, how often you need to water, and how that water soaks in.
Okay.
So one of the big challenges that people in Kansas have is we have that kind of heavy clay soil in a lot of areas.
Sure.
And clay only absorbs water at a rate of about 1/4 inch per hour.
Okay.
So if you put a whole inch of water down in 10 or 15 minutes, 3/4 of that inch is going to run off.
just run off, then you're
And
going.
you're not doing yourself any good. So
Sure.
you have to do what we call soak and cycle.
Okay.
So you run your system for however long is necessary to put down 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch, however what you assess that your soil can absorb.
Yeah.
Then you move on to a different zone or turn your system off, let it soak in for an hour or for the balance of the hour, and then you run it again for 10, 15 minutes.
okay.
And you let it run that cycle and let it soak in until you've gotten your inch of water.
All this talk about water has made me pretty thirsty. Janelle, can you handle the next couple minutes? I need a drink right now.
Sure. Well, while he's off getting some water, talking about water, there's the next big thing I think of with maintenance is mowing.
Right.
And I look at even this grass here behind us, and they've got it's kind of a long, unmanicured kind
Right.
of look, and you see a lot of like the natural grasses.
Right, your
that you
native
talked-
grasses.
Yeah, the native
Yeah.
grasses talked about today. Is there a recommendation as to the height and?
So if you're going for a lawn, a more manicured lawn appearance, with fescue we generally recommend a 2.5 to 3.5 inch tall mowing height. Especially you're trying to manage your water a little bit less. You maybe want to keep it a little taller in that 3 to 3.5 range, because that's going to shade the soil, keep things cooler, more hydrated. Your Bermuda grass and zoysia grass, they prefer a little bit shorter mowing, about 1 to 2 inches.
Welcome
Better.
back.
Well, thank you. Well, we did talk about watering, and it's not certainly on top of my mind right now, but I'm certain that the different varieties of grass, use the right terminology here, have different watering requirements.
Absolutely.
What's kind of a guideline for each one?
So with our fescue, as we were talking about before, if you're wanting to keep it green throughout the summer, you're probably going to be watering 2 to 3 times a week, probably every 3 days.
And that could get you something like this.
Right, that's going to get you your lush green. When it gets to 120, all bets are off, but
Sure.
hey, lots of things are off at 120.
Yeah.
So with your Bermuda buffalo and zoysia, they need much less water.
Okay.
They'll tolerate some water, but for instance, buffalo, if you water it, you're actually promoting weeds.
Oh.
So you would generally, with buffalo, want to only water if absolutely necessary, because buffalo is very drought tolerant. If it gets dry, it'll start to go dormant. It won't be damaged for the most part. And then when it gets a little moisture, it'll come back out of it.
All right. Fair
So
enough.
very little water requirement. Zoysia is going to take a little bit more water to keep it green, but if you water it heavily, then it's going to grow more, have more thatch issues, and you don't want to deal with all of those additional maintenance issues. Bermuda grass, well, it's really hard to kill it, so it's not like you're going to kill the Bermuda grass, but it's very drought tolerant as well. If you've got a patchy situation, it's good to assess why is it patchy. Is it just like a one-time thing, that something went wrong, maybe you had some grubs, if it's just a one-time thing, then go ahead, throw the same thing back in your lawn. Go with, if you've got fescue, patch with fescue. If you've got Bermuda grass, that Bermuda grass will fill back in.
It'll patch itself.
It'll patch itself. That's the benefit of that Bermuda grass.
Okay.
On the other hand, if you've got a spot in your yard that is always thinning out, then that's usually a sign something else is going on. And you might need to do a little bit of sleuthing work, maybe get a soil test, maybe assess is there too much shade. something is causing that grass to thin out or die out in that area. And that might be the time to consider doing something different. The Sedgwick County Extension Office does offer soil testing services. If you bring your soil sample in, we'll send it to K-State, get it analyzed, and we'll write up a recommendation for you based on your results.
Sure.
So that's going to check your pH, your nutrient levels, all those kinds of things.
All right.
If you think you maybe have an insect or a disease issue or something else going on, you're not sure, you can bring a sample into the extension office. It's also helpful if you bring both a sample of the grass and a picture.
Oh, okay.
Because then we can see the pattern as well as an actual physical sample of the grass.
Feel like your own forensics lab there then too.
Kind of, yes. We've got the microscopes and all kinds of stuff
Exactly.
like that. So, and when we want a lawn sample, usually if you've got a patch that's problematic, we want you to bring a sample from the edge of the problem area. So a sample that's got both some damaged grass on it and some healthy grass, because usually if there's an insect or disease, we'll be able to find it in that border zone, like where the problem is
As it's
expanding.
moving out.
Exactly. If you've got a problem area in your lawn, trying to figure out what to do with it, you can take a sample to your local extension office. There's an extension office in every county in Kansas.
Oh wow, that's pretty handy.
Yes, it is.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca.
Yes.
While we learn a lot about lawns from our master gardener friends, we should probably go into a little bit more detail, or at least refresher, about drainage. When we talk about making sure the slope of the yard is right, there's a few main reasons we want that. The first one is, of course, that as we discussed in previous episodes, unless you really want a wet basement and other such issues, you want your slope to go away from your house. So that it should gradually drain water, as water will take the path of least resistance away from where you live. The other thing, of course, is you want to avoid standing water. Standing water is a great way in the summertime. Standing water will, of course, attract mosquitoes. They'll like to lay their eggs in there, and of course, you have mosquito problems like the one hold on. I think I got it. Took care of it for now. Anyway, we want to avoid mosquito issues and mosquito problems, because it's for the health of your family and your loved ones and your pets who may be out there more often. Those are major things we want to talk about when we talk about making sure your drainage is correct in your lawn area.
Speaking of undesirables, we've covered all the desirable grasses, but what about the ones we don't want?
It's funny, we've kind of arbitrarily decided what's a good and desirable lawn covering and what's a bad or undesirable plant. But it's rather feels kind of arbitrary. I see nothing wrong. Well, let me rephrase that. Well, a lazy person might think there's nothing wrong with maybe a yard that's just filled with dandelions, for instance.
Well, I've never heard of dandelions as being technically acceptable in lawn care, but I think most people would call it a weed, especially when it starts taking over the grass that we've either purchased or brought in.
That's probably the main point then, is just whatever you wanting the lawn to be, that's what's going to be the desirable or acceptable thing. But let's go see if our expert can't shed maybe a little bit more light on how to take care of those pesky things.
Sounds good.
So I figure might as well come back to the expert if we're going to be talking about weed care and what to do to, what all the stuff we dump on our lawns should, take the form of what it should be. So
Well, this is interesting. You're going to take care of your weeds?
Well, I
A
think
lot of people prefer to kill them.
I'm going to take care of it in a more
She just called you out.
mobster type way. We're going to
Okay.
take care of the problem. They'll
Gotcha.
sleep with the fishes.
Yeah. When you're dealing with weeds, the first thing always to do is to figure out what kind of weed you're having a problem with.
Okay.
Because you can put down herbicides until you're blue in the face, but if it's not going to kill the weed that you've got, then what's the point, right? Is it crabgrass? Is it dandelions? Is it chickweed and henbit? Is
Okay.
it sandburrs? Figure out what your weed problem is. And then from there, we're going to determine how best to get rid of it.
Well, dandelions are probably the most visible and obvious ones to diagnose. What's the best way to take care of them? We'll start that. an easy one, right?
Well, the challenge with dandelions is that we want to kill them when we see them blooming in yellow.
Right.
And when a weed is blooming is the 110% worst time to try to kill it.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Okay.
because it's putting its energy into the flower, and what you want is when it's putting its energy into the root.
So I've learned so much here.
I know.
So,
Really interesting.
so with dandelions, actually the best time to kill them is in the fall or winter.
Okay.
Because they're tiny, they're just kind of hanging out, but they're kind of growing. So late fall, you can use a broadleaf herbicide product on them, or even in the early spring before they bloom.
Okay.
If you spray them when they're blooming, yeah, you'll kill some of them, but once they're blooming, they're probably going to put seed out, and then you've got more.
Damage done already.
Yeah, so you're better off trying to get rid of the young, small plants that are growing in the late fall,
Okay.
rather than wait till you see the blooms in the spring.
Now, does that hold true then for a lot of the other weeds too, or?
That is for like the chickweed and henbit. You know, if you see the purple flowers and the white flowers
I know
in the
that one.
spring,
Yeah.
yep, those are the same story. The same broadleaf herbicide that you put down in the fall to get rid of the dandelions is going to take care of them as well.
Okay.
And you may get a little germination throughout the winter, so spot sprays as you see the plants in the spring is going to help keep things under control.
All right. Then what about fertilizer? Then the good stuff that we want to make it. Is there anything we should really look for? I mean, go to a superstore or any kind of lawn care place. There's a lot of choices out there, but I mean, is it just packaging or are there real differences?
It really depends on what you're looking for.
Okay.
With fertilizers, for instance, your fescue, we recommend fall fertilization, September and November, and then May if you're going to be irrigating during the summer.
Okay.
With our warm season grasses, we recommend fertilizing in June. And then if you want a little higher quality Bermuda grass, you could do like May and July, do a little bit more. In the fall, a quick release fertilizer.
Okay.
So something that's water soluble. If you want to do a winterizer, that's fine, nothing wrong with that. In the spring, we recommend a slow release fertilizer, something that's going to slowly make available that nitrogen to the grass.
As they're growing
And
and
the
developing.
most important nutrient for your grass is that nitrogen. Unless you've had a soil test that recommends it, you probably don't need phosphorus and much potassium in your lawn.
Rebecca, thank you so much for your time once more.
No problem.
All right.
All right, and thank you.
you.
Okay, we're going this way? Okay, we're going this way. I thought you were going to walk the other way this way.
I did, and then you...
When it comes to lawns, there's a wide variety of things we can talk about when it comes to the greenness of them, other than, of course, the ideal color for them during spring. But there's also the things we discussed earlier, but moving on to even things that we can go into now, such as building in some drought-resistant features. One of the easiest way, if you really want a lawn, of course, would be a buffalo grass, which requires very little care and watering. In fact, it's generally easier to overwater buffalo grass than it actually is to underwater it. But the problem with buffalo, of course, that it doesn't really green up until much later in the season. Even more out of the box thinking would be doing some xeriscaping, where you don't even really have a lawn at all. You, of course, still have the space, but instead use rocks and cactuses, really drought-resistant things to make your outdoor space look great without having to own a lawnmower. Certainly some advantages built in there. There's also drought-resistant ground coverings and things like that, and certainly a great idea. Water is going to be one of your main resources, and most of our lawns are very heavily water dependent. Of course, even more important though is going to be, depending upon what kind of lawn you go with, is making sure your soil quality is good. You can keep putting all sorts of fertilizers and grass seed down, but if your soil is barren, you're not going to get a lot of life springing forth from it. So you really have to make sure your soil quality is good first and foremost. Otherwise, you're wasting a lot of time and resources and money on a place where it's just not going to grow very well. When it comes to actual ongoing treatment of your yard, of course, mow a little higher, 3 inches or more, and of course, water in the mornings. Things you've heard 1,001 times, this will make it 1,002. Water in the mornings. It'll avoid more mold and mildew issues, of course. Water won't sit overnight, and as well as your grass gets a great watering as way to start the day before that 100 degrees sets in. There are on the market, of course, a pretty good variety anymore of organic fertilizers and biopesticides for treatment and care of your lawn. And the other big one, of course, is don't bag it. Just mulch that thing if you can, because then the grass clippings go straight back into the soil. Of course, you can develop some issues with some undergrowth if they kind of thatch down there, but you can, of course, deal with that as it comes up. I always prefer mulching just because I'm lazy, but your mileage may vary. Finally, there's also what you choose in grass seeds. There's some newer grass seeds on the market that actually keep the nice green look but grow slower. You might want to check into some things like that if you're, again, like me, looking to avoid running that mower as much as possible. You know, for as much as we discussed lawns, the care of them, what types of lawns there are, and all that kind of good stuff, we never really discussed the necessity of them. I mean, why even bother?
I suppose, though, at the end of the day, it's just nice to have a place to call your own, whether the weather decides to accommodate or not.
Yeah, and as we've learned, there's always things you could be doing to make it stronger, healthier, better, thicker, more luscious.
Now that we've added to your to-do list, thanks for joining us this week on Homeowner's Handbook, Lawn Edition. See you next week.
Yeah. Man, I wish I were back on that turf field. The Homeowner's Handbook was made possible through North Star Comfort Services. For over 65 years, North Star has been helping make more comfortable and energy-efficient living environments for Kansans. For future show ideas or feedback about this episode, please feel free to contact the Homeowner's Handbook.
Next time on the Homeowner's Handbook, we'll be discussing lighting and the wide variety of ways to go about lighting your space.
Where... Don't use that.
All reasonable efforts have been made to make the information in this program accurate and up to date. Any errors or omissions are unintended and may be addressed in future programs.
I was just so excited.
No houses have been harmed in the making of this program.
Why don't we... Hey.